Yes.
Welcome back to Viewpoint. Joshua Frydenberg is the Prime Minister's Parliamentary Secretary. He focuses on budget measures, red tape, cost savings in the budget at the moment. But a few years ago, he was a foreign policy advisor to Foreign Minister Alexander Downer. I, in fact, worked with him in that office at that time. In fact, travelled with Josh and then Foreign Minister Alexander Downer to Iraq in 2003 after the fall of Saddam Hussein. Josh Frydenberg then went on to work for John Howard, advising the then Prime Minister on national security issues. He's also studied these international affairs issues at Harvard and Oxford. So he's very well versed in matters of international security, and he joined me earlier this evening. Josh Frydenberg, thanks for joining Viewpoint again.
Nice to be with you, Chris.
The Prime Minister has announced a significant deployment to the Middle East today. It's more than a token deployment, it's quite a significant deployment in my view, with the FA-18 Super Hornets, the refuelling aircraft and also SAS troops. What precisely is the mission?
Well, you're right, Chris. It is a substantial force, around 600 Australian Defence personnel, 8 Super Hornets, an air refuelling capacity, also some early warning aircraft, together with a couple of hundred Defence Force personnel who can act as advisors to the Peshmerga as well as to the Iraqi army. So what the motivation here is to give the support to the Iraqi army on the ground and Peshmerga so that they can stem the tide and the advance of ISIS. Now, whether we participate in any bombing missions is an issue to be decided in due course. But the point that really is worth underlining here, Chris, is it's a multinational mission. It not only includes the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, France, but also it also includes forces from Jordan, Bahrain, and the United Emirates. So it's a multinational.
I want to come to what makes up the coalition in a moment, but firstly the actual mission itself. We know that President Obama wants to significantly curtail Islamic State, but exactly what is Australia committing to? In other words, how will we know when Australia's commitment has been met?
Well, as the Prime Minister and our Defence Force representatives have said, this is not going to be a short mission. This is likely to be quite a lengthy one. And in terms of the specifics of any mission ahead of the Defence Force personnel who have been deployed, that will be worked out once they are in position. But clearly we have a overarching aim here, which is to degrade and to destroy ISIS. And that's a very difficult task, because they have made rapid advances, particularly in Iraq, where the second largest city of Mosul has fallen, obviously in Syria as well, and their numbers have been growing rapidly, with more than 10,000 foreign fighters making their way to the battlefields in Iraq and Syria. So we just need to stop this advance, and in terms of the actual specifics of the actions taken, that will be worked out in due course. But already the Prime Minister has said that our defence personnel will be acting as military advisors to the Iraqi army and to the Peshmerga force.
You mentioned the potential for bombing raids. Of course, the FA-18 Super Hornets are primarily an attack aircraft. They're not there primarily for surveillance. If they do conduct attack raids on Iraqi territory, presumably that would be at the invitation of the Iraq government. But could Australian fighter jets actually go into operational missions into Syria where they're not invited?
Oh, look, you're working into the areas of the hypothetical right now, Chris, because, as you know, Syria is very fragmented, and you've got the forces that are loyal to Bashar al-Assad on the one side, then you've got a whole lot of jihadist forces represented by ISIS, and then you've got the Free Syrian Army, which are also operating there and seem to be of a more moderate kind. So it's a very delicate and difficult environment. In Iraq, it's a bit different, because you've now seen the replacement of Nouri al-Maliki as the Prime Minister in Iraq. with Haider al-Abadi, and Prime Minister Abbott has already spoken to Prime Minister al-Abadi, and it's quite clear that Australia's deployment, as well as the other forces from the other countries, are being done with the approval and support of the Iraqi army. So it is quite and the Iraqi government. So it is quite a different situation.
You mentioned that the Prime Minister said this could take many, many months. Isn't it more likely this could be a commitment from the international community, including Australia, that could take years? Because once Islamic State fighters or terrorists are fragmented and go to ground, it will be ground battles that are required. Of course, the international community saying it won't do that. You'll be relying on the Iraqis and the Kurds to do that, and it'll take a long while.
Well, Prime Minister Abbott and President Obama have made it very clear we're not deploying combat troops on the ground. But we have to understand the nature of this threat. We have seen ISIS conduct major attacks and create humanitarian tragedies, including the potential genocide of the Yazidi people on Mount Sinjar, and of course what has transpired in Syria. And we also know that it has great capacity, this conflict with ISIS, to spread further afield and create greater dislocation and geostrategic instability, as well as exporting terrorism to countries like Australia. And we know that 60 Australians or more have gone to fight in the harder-edged way in Syria and Iraq, as well as another 100 or so of Australians who have gone over to assist. Now, these Australians come back here and create a great threat to stability in Australia and to our security in Australia. So we have a good rationale and a good purpose to go over there and try to stop the bloodshed and protect Australians here as well.
Indeed. Well, there are Australian boots on the ground. They're just terrorist boots, not military boots. With SAS soldiers part of this deployment, is it too much to expect that they won't end up on the ground fighting in northern Iraq or Syria? I mean, that is what they're well known for. The Americans certainly respect their capability. They've been on the ground in Iraq before.
Well, that's not what the Prime Minister is talking about, Chris. As you know, we're working as advisors to the Iraqi military because they have a real need to bring stability to their own country after the fall of Mosul and the rapid advancement of ISIS. So, they have a need to take action, and with the support of the Americans, us, the United Kingdom, France, and the many other Arab nations, I think we can have some success pretty quickly in degrading the capacity of ISIS.
We've seen how weak the Iraqi government has been under Nouri al-Maliki, and of course there's hope of a better political settlement now. But over the last few years we've seen the Iraqi political settlement fragment. We've seen their security forces fall away in the face of Islamic State. To have a medium to long-term success here, you need a strong government in Baghdad and strong Iraqi security forces. What is being done to make sure that happens?
Well, you're right. You do need a multi-ethnic coalition, if you like, within Iraq, because it's made up of Shiites, Sunnis and Kurds, and Nouri al-Maliki, who was a Shiite, was seen as too close to Iran and alienated a large number of the Sunnis, and so therefore the Sunni population wasn't prepared to take up arms against the Sunni jihadists from ISIS. So it's hoped that Haider al-Abadi, who the Prime Minister has talked to in recent days, will do much better than his predecessors. But there is a much broader division that's occurring in the Middle East right now between Sunnis and Shiites, and it really threatens stability in a number of countries. And this has been compounded by the rise of jihadism and extremism, and we've seen with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and its adherents like Hamas in the Gaza Strip, all becoming much more forceful and becoming much more prominent.
Well, that gets to the coalition. It's this Sunni-Shia divide that makes it difficult to get the broad coalition and the significant countries that the international community needs to be involved. The Sunni Arabs from Saudi Arabia, the Turkish Arabs, and of course the Shia Persians from Iran are not going to really contribute in a strong military way to settling this issue and putting down this terrorist threat, and that's what the international community needs.
But as you know, the Arab League has been very forthright in their condemnation of ISIS, and in this multinational coalition that President Obama is putting together, it has representation from Jordan and from Bahrain and from the United Arab Emirates. And Prime Minister Abbott has also spoken to the Crown Prince in the United Arab Emirates about Australia's participation over there in trying to degrade ISIS. So I think we are seeing some movement from the Arab world, which is in a positive way.
Are we now almost exactly where we were in about 2006 before President George Bush went into the surge? And doesn't this just demonstrate very, very clearly that President Barack Obama, with the blessing of allies like Australia, was absolutely wrong to withdraw all American military personnel from Iraq 3 years ago?
Well, as you know, that wasn't a decision that President Obama lightly took.
In fact, he was advised against it. He was advised against it because this could be the outcome. Is it not clear now that he made a mistake in withdrawing that security support from Iraq?
But it's only fair to point out, Chris, that Nouri al-Maliki didn't want the Americans to have a larger force of around 10,000 staying in Iraq, and I think the Americans would have been prepared to keep that force there, which would have made a real difference. But Maliki wouldn't have a bar of it, and therefore Maliki was essentially part of this problem. So I think, turning a fresh page with Haider al-Abadi, the new Prime Minister of Iraq, offers some prospect for us going forward. But there's no glossing over the difficulties in trying to forge this multi-ethnic coalition within Iraq, which, as I said, is made up of Sunnis, Shiites and Kurds.
Well, as Australians take a deep breath and worry, no doubt, no matter how worthwhile the cause to try and stop this bloodshed, everyone, of course, is worried we are sending troops again to the Middle East. I can't help but think of Afghanistan and how Australian troops have been pulled out of Afghanistan, and we're about to see the Americans draw down completely from Afghanistan as well. Are we going to see the same sort of situation unfold in Afghanistan, where all the gains are surrendered because we don't leave behind significant security support for the newly installed democratic governments?
Well, you're right. You do need to leave behind a suitable and well-equipped army that is intent on, in the case of Afghanistan, stopping the Taliban, and in the case of Iraq, stopping groups like ISIS. But these are very difficult missions. I mean, you raise Afghanistan, which I think is a very good point, because the reason why we went into Afghanistan in the first place, Chris, as Australia, together with other countries, was because Afghanistan became the global headquarters for terrorism. When Australians died, whether it was in September the 11th or in the Bali bombing or in other international attacks, in every case, the perpetrators of those offences had links back to Afghanistan. Now we're seeing Iraq fragment, Syria fragment, and then ISIS get a stronghold in those countries for which they can then export their jihadism and their extremism and their intolerance. And just the other day, we saw Abu Bakr Bashir from Jemaah Islamiyah in Indonesia on our doorstep give his support to ISIS. This is a very good illustration of the significance of the problem, and unless we go on the front foot and try to degrade groups like ISIS, they will become stronger, their dangerous philosophy will gain more adherents, and unfortunately Australians will go over there to fight, then come back here to Australia where they can cause real harm to our interests, to our people and to our property.
It is indeed deeply worrying. Thanks again for joining us on Viewpoint. Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg.
Thanks, Chris.
The beauty